All right, I think we're recording. So, yeah, sorry if the audio is a little marginal. I have to, I guess I have a really good microphone, but I have it plugged into the other computer. I just don't like having to switch it, but I probably should. So anyway, probably shouldn't use this computer, actually, the one I'm using, because it's just not as good. But anyway. It's just easier to have the two accounts on different computers, but blah, 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 blah. Anyway, proceeding.
Scattered by electrons and bounced off electrons. And in other words, you can see electrons as they go by if the light's strong enough. So we stand back here and we look to see whether we see when the electron is counted here.
So I understand these slits are really small. It's really difficult to create a good detector, but I haven't seen any documentation of anybody who's ever tried. And frankly, they should try. They should work on such devices because, as I stated, if you think about detecting from the bottom, so the pattern is always going this way in the sense that you're just really looking for diffraction in a certain plane. And if you shoot something to disturb the electrons in another direction, the one advantage is you might not disturb them as much in the sideways direction, a lot more. 70% of the change will be in this upward direction and only 30% in this way, so that way you'd still be getting a pretty an observable pattern. Not as good, but you'd get one. And you'd also be able to know what slit the electron went through. So it is, I think, a doable experiment. They just haven't done it.
A flash, you'll have seen the moment before the electrons counted, a flash behind hole 1 or a flash behind hole 2, or maybe a sort of a half flash in each place at the same time. Which we're going to find out now how it goes by looking. Well, you turn on the light and look. And lo, you discover that you see flashes behind either one hole or the other hole every time you get a count here.
So he's talking about this as if it was tried or that it was done. And of course it wasn't done. And he's going to explain why it isn't done. But I mean, he's talking as if it's something they've done, and that's why they've drawn a conclusion about what the results would be. Because they saw it. They never saw the results. They're just assuming what the results would be. And they're, of course, assuming within their framework of understanding, consistent with what they've decided the cause is.
Every time there's a count here, you see a flash behind number 1 or behind number 2. What you see is that the electron comes 100% complete through hole 1 or through hole 2. When you look, kind of apparent.
See, there's lots of paradoxes, though. That's the whole point. Because now we have the thing like the interferometer. They say it's wave interference, yet no one diagrams where in the interferometer this interference takes place. Does it happen when the photons first are introduced to the experiment and then the single photon goes in both directions? Or does it happen after, where two different photons interfere with each other? The same question could be asked in the radar experiment. How do two different photons interact with each other without a wave function? There's no consistency in this theory at all, and yet they're so arrogant.
Let's squeeze nature into some kind of a difficulty here. I show you what we're going to do, see? We're going to keep the light on, we're going to watch. And we're going to count how many electrons come through. And we're going to make 2 columns. I'll watch the holes very carefully while you please count how many are arriving in the detector. All right, you say, one arrived. I said, I saw that when it went through hole number 1. So we put here 2 columns, which is column 1 for number 1 hole and number 2 hole. And every time you get one, you tell me.
Right, and in reality, it's just as made up as this theater here. There's no facts that this is based on. This is just what they wish the truth to be.
About when I have seen it, of course, and I say either number 1 or 2. The first one was 1. What's the next one? Number 2. All right. Number 2. Number 2. Number 1. Talk. So as we watch the electrons, as I watch the electrons, for every one that you count, I can separate them experimentally into two columns. Them are what have arrived via hole one, and those, I know the English is right, I'm just trying to, that arrive via hole two. So the number, the total number that arrives, well, first, what does this column look like when you add it all together for different positions here, which is just the number that's supposed to come through one? I watch behind one, and what do I see? I see this curve. That number column is distributed this way.
Right. It has no evidence that that happened. There's no experiment that demonstrates that the detector causes the photons to become, not only lose the interference pattern, but narrow in their divergence. That somehow they aren't more diverged. The detector's clearly going to cause more agitation. It's not going to make the photon travel straighter. It's going to make the photon or the electron travel more erratically. So there should be a wider pattern, not the same pattern. If there's going to be no pattern. I would argue there's still going to be the interference pattern because you haven't changed the photon, the fact that it went through a slit. Now the question is whether you do this detecting before it goes through the slit or after it goes through the slit. But again, it's never been done. Either way.
Just like we thought when we closed hole two. It works the same way whether we're looking or not. If we close hole two, the same distribution.
So again, there's no evidence that that happens except he's saying this is what our theory predicts. Our theory says this happens. But there's no evidence that this happens. And he's implying that there's evidence. There's no evidence, and this is just him saying so. Period. And that's good science? No, it's really bad science. You don't get to just make up the evidence.
You know, it arrives as if we are watching. And likewise, the number in this column that is supposed to arrive via hole number two is also the simple curve. Now look, the total number which arrives has to be the total number. I'm just counting little marks. It has to be the sum of this number plus that number. The total number which arrives absolutely has to be the sum of these two. It has to be distributed this way.
It, of course, doesn't have to be by any reasoning whatsoever, except their narrowing of reality, their imposition of a function for which there's no evidence that the function exists. There is nothing that forces that to be true. Nothing demonstrated to be in existence. You might as well be saying the dark matter makes this happen. And I don't have to account for the existence of the dark matter. We're just going to suppose its existence because it helps my experiment. But that's all this is. Again, this is just contriving a fact as if you have evidence for it when all you did is make it up.
I said it was distributed this way. It's distributed this way. It really is what happens. It is. It's distributed this way.
It has to be by, again, no rule that has been established as a fact.
If then we mark with a prime the result when a light is lit, prime means with a light lit, then we find N1 prime is practically the same as N1 without the light, and N2 prime is almost the same as N2. But the number that we see when the light is on is equal to the number that we see through 1 plus the number that we see through 2.
And the same is true when there is a pattern. Again, they're just pretending they don't know what slit it went through, and therefore they can't count the ends, but they know that it went through one or the other. That's the logical implication, and they haven't proved that it did anything other than that. They certainly haven't proven that it went through both slits in any way whatsoever. Zero evidence for that, except them saying so.
This is the result that we get when the light is on. In other words, we get a different answer whether I turn on the light or not.
So, again, he says it as if it really happened. He said it as if there was a real experiment that demonstrated it. Neither is the truth. There's no reason to believe any of this. No reasoning for belief unless you're already joined the religion. There's no reason for me to believe in the Holy Ghost if I don't believe in Jesus or God.
If I have the light turned on, This is the distribution which you measure over here. If I turn
And again, it wouldn't be that distribution. The two humps would be right next to each other, so the peak would be even. It would just be a peak with a little tiny difference at the tip. But it's not what happens anyway.
turn off the light,
So it was never done.
this is the distribution which you measure over here. Turn on the light, that's the answer. Turn off the light, that's the answer.
Okay, just absolutely no evidence, no experiment, no facts, no anything, and that he says it as if it's a fact. He says it as if it's an experiment. It's not an experiment. It's not a fact.
Nature squeezed out.
Yeah, nature has nothing to do with this. This is all their imagination, and that's all it is. I mean, yes, nature provided us with a capacity to abstract, and so they've abstracted, a Jedi world where they can have lightsabers and do these silly things. But none of it has been demonstrated to have anything to do with the reality.
Now, we could say then that the light affects the result.
Yes, obviously, we would all agree on that photons hitting electrons will move the electron, change its course.
If the light is on, you get a different answer than if the light is off. If you want to, you say the light affects, it does affect. In fact, we found this by this experiment, we get a difference with the light on and off. Light affects.
Well, we found from this experiment, again, the experiment wasn't done, it's just nonsense, it's just baby talk. It's just a fake. It's a fake story that has nothing to do with the real historical record. There is no such experiment. There is no such result. And again, logically, you can understand why this can't be right. And logically, you can understand that if they did attempt to move to detect the electrons, they would be shooting energy at it, and shooting more energy wouldn't make it fly straighter. If I shoot energy at this electron, it's going to cause the electron to move into one of these directions. Some portion of its momentum is going to be changed in that direction. So it can't possibly create the same pattern. It can't. It has to be a more erratic pattern.
Affects the behavior of the electron. If you want to talk about the motion of the electrons through here, which is a little inaccurate, you can say that the light affects the motion. So that those which might have arrived at the maximum are somehow been mediated or kicked by the light and arrive at the minimum. Instead, thus smoothing the curve to produce this thing.
Right. So he's theorizing about an experiment that didn't happen. So he's explaining the causes and effects of an experiment they didn't do. it's just made up. Clearly, there should be some remnant of the pattern if you don't disturb them too much. So you'd have to disturb them an awful lot to wipe out all of the pattern.
You see, electrons are very delicate. Although when you're looking at a baseball and you shine light on it, it doesn't make any difference. The baseball goes the same way. Electrons are very flimsy, very delicate. And when you shine a light on it, a little puff on the electron, it knocks them about a bit. And instead of doing that, they do this because you turn the light on so strong. You hit them with a hammer. It's not just a delicate thing like when you're looking at a baseball with light.
But the point is you can reduce the amount of impact to a minimum. And again, if you're changing the trajectory in a dimension for which your pattern doesn't exist, then you're likely to retain some of your patterns. So if you're changing them up and down, and there were the patterns going horizontally, you have some chance of preserving your pattern.
Yeah, I hit him with a hammer. But you usually turn up the light too strong. Turn it weaker and weaker and weaker until it's very dim. And then use very careful detector that can see very dim light. And look with the dim light. Now, as the light gets dimmer and dimmer, you can't expect with very, very, very weak light to affect the electron so completely as to change the pattern 100% from this pattern to this pattern. As the light gets weaker and weaker and weaker, somehow it should get more and more like no light at all. And how then does this turn into that? And it turns out that light is not like a wave of water, but light also comes in particle-like character called photons. And as you turn down the intensity of the light, You're not turning down the effect, you're turning down the number of photon particle-like things that are coming out.
Right, but it's still an intensity issue. So if I hit a baseball with one ping pong ball, I'm not going to affect it too much. Now, if I hit it with 20 ping pong balls, I'm going to affect it a lot more. So if I can reduce the number of ping pong balls or tennis balls I hit the electron with, I won't disturb the baseball quite as much. And the argument would be that if you are capable of sending few photons as possible, you won't disturb the electron so much that you eliminate the pattern. And it's a perfectly logical argument. There's no reason that can't be true.
Out of the source. So as I turn down the light, I'm getting fewer and fewer photons. The least I can scatter from an electron is one photon, and if I had too few photons, well, sometimes the electron will get through, and it just happened there wasn't enough light. There was no photon coming by. I didn't see it. So a very weak light doesn't mean a small disturbance. It just means a few photons. And
what you could argue that, yes, if you only hit half the electrons that go through the experiment, so let's say I hit half of them, and the other half I don't hit with any photons. So I'm shooting so few photons that I only hit half the electrons, so I only disturb half of them. Then you're guaranteed to have at least half your pattern still, and you'll have proven that the other half of the electrons, you were perfectly capable of detecting them anyway. You did detect them going through one slit or the other slit. You didn't detect them going through both slits, and you didn't detect them at not existing. So you did detect them heading in a trajectory, and you disturbed that trajectory. So yes, those photons don't make a pattern anymore, but you did detect them, which means the ones you could logically deduce that the ones you didn't detect and are now making the pattern did the same thing, because it already happened after the event of interference.
what happens is that I have to invent a third column. You see, you get a click over here. I saw that when I was in number one hole. This was behind hole number two. Then another contact. Sorry, I didn't see that. There wasn't enough light to give a photon at that time, so there must be a third column under didn't see. And when the light is very strong, there are very few in there. When the light is very weak, most of them end in there. So that there are three columns, this one, and a few times in here.
Never done. I'm just saying, very valid experiment, very valid thing to talk about having been done. Never done. So he's just talking about a thought experiment. He's not talking about something they actually did. So he's just making up his own rules because he doesn't have any evidence to narrow his statements. There's no proof that he has to be obedient to. He can just say whatever he wants to say because it's a made-up scenario that never took place in reality.
Now you can guess what happened. The ones I do see are distributed this way. The ones I didn't see are distributed that way. And as I turn the light weaker and weaker...
So again, they wouldn't be distributed. I keep going over this, whatever, the little breast thing here. It's one breast, okay, just a little blurry. And there's no reason to believe that the detector would keep the photons in that narrow pattern. They would be changed, spread, scattered, the electrons.
Well, I see less and less of them. With greater and greater fraction are not seen. And the actual curve, in any case, is a sum of a mixture of this and this, and as the light gets weaker, so there's fewer and fewer seen.
Again, but you would learn the fact that you did detect an electron that went through one slit or the other. It didn't go through both, and it was an electron. So at least it tells you something, that whatever this wave function is or this probability thing, it's something you can actually hit with photons. So you did demonstrate that much.
One more like that in a continuous fashion. So, in this case, if the electrons are not seen and nothing bounced off the light under those circumstances, you get this complicated pattern for those electrons which were not seen. The ones in the column didn't see are exactly distributed.
So again, you can't miss the fact that he's saying this as if it took place. And again, it never happened. Nobody did the experiment. First, you have to make incredibly tiny detectors. Difficult to do. And again, they have to be very sensitive. But no one's done it. There's no paper, there's no anything anywhere that tells you they did this. it's not been done.
In this complicated way, and the other two columns are in these two ways here. Now, you say, I got another way to measure which hole it goes through. And I'm sorry I haven't got enough time to discuss a large number of different inventions that you might have to find out which hole the electron went through and what happened.
Yeah, see, but that would have been the much better conversation, and all these simplifications and all this other stuff would to get into all these other, hey, there could be other possibilities of what's going on here than what I'm saying. And so again, I would just go to my recent thought to just make a 90-degree angled surface of chrome, mirrored surface, shoot two laser beams at the mirrored surface and shoot those two beams through the slit experiment. Then you'll know you can have a red beam go through one slit and a green beam go through the other slit and see what happens.
Happens in each case. It always turns out, however, that it's impossible to...
So, okay, it always turns out it's impossible. You never even did this experiment. So, I mean, to say something's impossible when they haven't tried anything, they really weren't terribly interested in finding the cause. They clearly decided at some point, we're done with this cause crap. We're just going to say it's a magical probability feature of the universe, and we're just going to forget about causes and effects and all that stuff, and we'll just go with this wacky theory. And it's I mean, I hate to be derogatory, but to me it's wacky. Okay, maybe to somebody else it's complex or fancy or interesting. But yeah, to me it's just silly.
Arrange the light in any way so that you can tell through which...
So again, in any way, he's negating all sorts of possibilities, and yet he has no evidence and no reason to negate all those possibilities because he hasn't done it. He hasn't tried anything. He hasn't tried any of this. He's just claiming, oh yeah, we thought of lots of ways to do it, and none of them worked. When they didn't even do this one.
Which hole the thing is going without disturbing the pattern of arrival of the electrons from this form to this form.
Yeah, again, but so what? It still tells you it went through one slit or the other. And again, there's no evidence that you can't disturb the electrons and still get the pattern. All of the electrons. You could hit all of them with one photon and have one photon reflect and catch it. And presumably you'll still have a pattern. It'll be messed up, but it'll still be there.
And not only light, but anything else. You use neutrinos, you use anything. There's a principle that's impossible.
See, it's a principle because they've accepted a principle. Now, a principle that was never proven by anything called an experiment that has evidence. So it's just an idea they came up with where they said the reason why photons, we can't see, the photons, we can't measure them. There's a rule that says we're not allowed to. The universe says we're not allowed to know their position and velocity. We can only know their position or their velocity, but we can't know both at the same time. And they've just made it into some kind of law. It's only a principle, they say, but they've turned it into the Heisenberg law. They've made it into a law. Because they talk about it as if they have some evidence that it's true, when it's not true. It's clearly the smallest thing in the universe. We can't physically interact with it. There's no way we can bounce photons off of photons. That's like throwing baseballs at baseballs. It's just not going to work. Volkswagens at Volkswagens. I mean, you're not going to be able to see a Volkswagen that way. We can't resolve them. They're too small. So the one thing that we can't see is the one thing in the universe that has this magical rule, this law about it, that says we're not allowed to discover the truth. Now, there's no rule saying we can't discover the truth. The problem is we can't make a measuring device smaller than the smallest thing, so we can't measure the smallest thing.
To do it, you can if you want invent a way to tell which hole the electron's going through. Then it turns out it's going through one or the other. But if you're trying to make that instrument so that at the same time it doesn't disturb the motion of the electrons, then what happens is you get back. You can't tell anymore which one it goes through.
Again, so there's no variety of experiments that have been done. Like I said, I just illustrated. You could take a mirror, just shoot 45 degrees, shoot two beams. You could take the same laser beam with the same phase and shoot them through the two slits. And that experiment wasn't done. None of this has been done. None of this has been tested with any rigor, because they liked a conclusion, and they're just saying we're sticking with it. And it's just like Einstein's relativity and bent space and these incomplete answers. The virtual photon, their 110 new particles they invented. All of this crap that's completely superfluous to the basic function and doesn't really answer any of the questions. And they're happy with that. And to me, it's just like religion. It doesn't really answer any of the questions. God, as a creator, doesn't explain creation, because you're still stuck with who created God. I mean, what, he just poofed? The complex thing just poofed into existence? It doesn't answer any questions. And this nonsense doesn't answer any questions. Oh, the universe knew how to do randomness and probability law before it knew how to do push, bang. Something banged into something. I don't think so. I don't think that was the first act, was I know probability science. No, that wasn't the first thought.
So when you get this, if you can't tell, you get this. Heisenberg noticed when he discovered the laws of quantum mechanics that the new laws of nature that he discovered could...
So these laws of quantum mechanics, they're not laws. They're just not. There's no laws of quantum mechanics. There's theory. There's just no laws. There's not Newtonian laws that are the laws of quantum mechanics. They just don't exist.
It could only be consistent if there was some basic limitation to our experimental abilities that had not been previously recognized. In other words, you can't experimentally be as delicate as you wish.
Yeah, it's right. You can't make a ruler that has marks on it that are smaller than the smallest thing in the universe. You just can't do it. So the smallest thing always has to be this big, and you can't make a ruler that can measure anything smaller, because it would be smaller than the smallest thing.
And he proposed his uncertainty principle, which stated in terms of our experiment is the following. He stated it another way, but they're exactly...
Okay, so he said our experiment. Again, didn't say our thought experiment. We imagined doing this experiment and imagined what the results would be. So again, just clearly deceptive.
You can get from one to the other, but unfortunately I haven't time to explain that.
Yeah, well, you really can't get from one to the other. It's really just you either are religious or you're a scientist. And if you're a scientist, you wait for the evidence. And if you're religious, you jump the evidence.
But in our experiment, his uncertainty principle would be stated in this manner. It is impossible to design any apparatus whatsoever to determine which hole the electron passes. Number one is
again, and all you really need is a gun that shoots straight. So if you can shoot the electron straight, you've solved the problem. If you can shoot a photon straight, know where exactly it's going to go, because then you can just shoot it randomly in all the locations of the slit and shoot it randomly in all the locations of the other slit. And because it's a single photon event, you're guaranteed to create exactly the circumstance that a random gun would do, except you did it on purpose, and you know exactly where each photon is going. It's going through that slit, it's going through this slit, it's going through that slit, it's going through this slit. So there's clearly mechanisms you can create, and it's just a matter of, that's masterable technology. No reason to think we can't do that. No reason to think we can't do that with electrons right now. They probably can, but they haven't done it. They couldn't care less. They don't want to answer this question. They have an answer they want, which is, we can now create a wooey-verse full of wooiness, and that sells. People want uncertainty. They want to believe in some kind of magic. They don't want a deterministic, cold, pool ball universe.
Succeed in determining which hole the electron passes, through which hole the electron, which can determine through which hole the electron passes. That will not at the same time disturb the electron enough to destroy the interference.
So let's understand that theoretically this is all a moot point in some respects, because now they have atoms, much bigger things. You can clearly hit them with quite a few photons before you're going to disturb them enough to ruin their pattern. So do the experiment with the atoms. Alright, should be recording, hopefully. Fucking calls. Anyway.
And no one has found a way around this. And I'm sure you're all itching with invention as to methods of detecting what you call the electron.
So just kind of a mocking, oh yeah, we already did it all. We already thought of it all. You're just silly. And they haven't tried anything. They really haven't done any work at all. And they're just pretending as if they have thought of everything and done everything when they didn't do anything at all. They didn't try at all.
Went through, but if each one of them is analyzed carefully, you'll find out there's something the matter with it, and that if, without disturbing the electron, you think you could do it, but it turns out there's always something the matter, and you can account for the difference.
So again, he just says it as if they know from some evidence or some reasoning. There's no evidence, no reasoning. They thought about it for 5 minutes, said, I'm really smart, I didn't think of it, so I guess nobody can think of it. It's just forget about it, let's not bother. Lots of ways you can change the way you do the experiment. Even now with high-powered lasers, you could almost argue that the amount of light being created by the pattern would actually be detectable in a smoky, if you blew smoke onto the area you're creating the pattern over, that you might actually be able to detect the rays of light.
Patterns due to the disturbance of the instruments used to determine through which hole the electron comes. Now, this, therefore, is a basic characteristic of nature and tells us something about everything.
All right, so again, he says it as if it's a confirmed by evidence fact. This is how the nature is. It doesn't allow for us to determine. It doesn't allow us to manipulate this experiment in any way. And there's just no reason to draw that conclusion. None, except their desire to draw it.
If a new particle is found tomorrow, the kaon, actually it's already been found. Something, give it a name, let's say a kaon. And I use kaons to interact with electrons to determine which hole the electron is going to. I already know ahead of time, I hope, enough about the behavior of the kaon to say that it cannot be of such a type that I could tell through which hole the electron would go without at the same time producing a disturbance on the electron to change the pattern from here to here. So that uncertainty principle.
So again, he's trying to invent new particles. Well, obviously we know that photons are about the smallest you can get anyway, so why would you go any smaller than a photon? But regardless, this is all just words that aren't backed up with any factual evidence. Nothing proves this as being impossible to dissect. He's basically saying you can't, if you go to put the knife into the frog to dissect the frog always explodes. And there's no way to stop the frog from exploding. Yeah, maybe there is. They haven't tried everything. They, in fact, tried nothing. And that's the truth.
Is used as a general principle to guess ahead at many of the characteristics of unknown...
They're not guessing ahead. See, guessing ahead would be you'll wait for the evidence to confirm it. Like you guessed, and then you did the experiment, and you got the evidence, and it confirmed it. They now have no expectation that the evidence will ever confirm or deny their jump. So they jumped ahead of the evidence, and they're not even trying to see what the evidence will actually say. They don't want to know the answer, clearly.
Objects, they are limited in their character. Well then, let's go back. What about this proposition A? Does it go either to one or the other, or not? Well, physicists have a convention, a way of avoiding the pitfalls which exist, and they make their game, their rules of thinking as follows. That if you have an apparatus which is capable of telling which hole the electron goes through, and you can have such apparatus, then one can say that it either goes through one hole or the other. And it does, when you look, it always is going through one hole or the other. When you look. But when you do not try to determine, or you have no disturbance, no apparatus there to determine through which hole the thing goes, under those circumstances, you cannot say that it either goes through one hole or the other. You can only say it, provided you stop thinking immediately and don't make any deduction from it.
Well, if you say it, you already made the deduction, but clearly the rational deduction is that, yes, it goes through one hole or the other. The rational deduction is that the photons are not doing anything at all in this experiment, magical, or the electrons. They're being completely controlled by the slits. The material objects are causing this effect. It is not being caused by photons and electrons.
I prefer not to say it, rather than to stop thinking at the moment. In other words, when we don't look, we can't say through which hole it's going, but if you try to look to see, you'll find it always goes through one hole or the other. Still, to conclude that it goes either through one hole or the other when you're not looking is to produce an error in prediction.
It's not an error in prediction in the sense that you don't have the evidence to measure the prediction. I would argue that that's a pretty safe bet. All right, and that you're never going to have an experiment that demonstrates it's not true. You're never going to show this going through both slit crap. It's never going to happen. So you're never going to verify the alternative explanation. So it's a pretty safe bet. Yeah, it goes through one or the other.
And that is the logical tightrope on which we have to walk if we wish to interpret nature.
Now, so the logical tightrope was before you got on the tightrope, and it was deciding what kind of rope you're going to walk. And you decided to walk on this rope made out of Jell-O.
This proposition that I'm talking about is more general. It's not just the two holes. It's a general proposition reads something like this, that the probability of any event in an ideal experiment, that just means that when everything is specified as well as it can be, the probability of an event is the square of something, which I call A here, is called the probability amplitude.
Right, and the probability amplitude is just a bar in a graph, and you just measure the area of the bars. Not complicated.
And when an event can occur in several alternative ways, the probability amplitude, this A number, is the sum of the A's for each of the various alternatives.
Yes, there's 1%, 2%, 10%, 20%, 50%. It all has to add up to 100%. It always has, there's a 100%, okay, that something will happen. One of those things.
And finally, if an experiment is performed which is capable of determining which alternative is taken, the probability of the event is the sum of the probabilities for each alternative. That is, you lose the interference.
So that's just a mushy rule, because obviously in different circumstances this isn't just about interference, it's about reflections off glass. It's lots of things that create a phenomenon like this, where you change the percentage of light that reflects off glass by, changing the thickness of the glass. Lots of things have these rules built in, and the rules are different for each material substance and each environmental circumstance. But there's no hard fact where you can say you can't engineer a way to see what actually happens or measure what happens. There's no rule that says you can't do these things. It's just difficult to watch photons. Very small, very fast, very small, very hard to watch.
Now, the question is, how does it really work? What machinery is actually producing this thing? Well, nobody knows any machinery. Nobody can give you a deeper explanation of this phenomenon than I have given. That is a description of it.
So again, he just keeps projecting that they have thought of all the possible ideas, and it's just a silly thing to say. It's just such bravado, just such arrogance to say we've thought of all the possibilities and we've eliminated them all. Maybe not. And I'm clearly voting for the maybe not part.
To give you a wider explanation in the sense that they can do more examples to show how it's impossible to tell which hole it goes through.
Yeah, more examples. They don't have any examples of how it's impossible. So again, this is just such baby talk. And there's no examples. There's no evidence. And they clearly haven't tested the experiment in every possible way. Do it in a vacuum. Do it with smoke. Do it with this. Do it with that. Do it in all these different ways to try to tease out of the experiment what the causes are. And they haven't done any of that. They haven't even recognized that it's not like water waves, that the pattern isn't the same, that it's only in one specific circumstance, that it has some same qualities. And it's only some qualities. It's not same in any kind of strict sense of the word. It only shares a few things in common, like a duck-billed platypus and a duck. Not the same animal.
Same time, not destroy the interference pattern. They can give a wider class of experiments than just the two-slit interference experiment and so on, but they're all just repeating the same thing to drive it in. It's not any deep.
So there's no driving in anything. There really isn't anything that validates this. There isn't any other where you can, make this more logical. You can do other experiments to create the pattern, and they'll create it in ways like Lloyd's mirror creates a completely artificial source. And you're saying, well, how can an artificial source create interference? You can't interfere with something that's an illusion. So it doesn't even make any sense. It's how you can't interact with illusionary photons.
Deeper, it's only wider. The mathematics can be made more precise. You can mention that they're complex numbers instead of real numbers and a couple of other minor points which have nothing to do with the main idea. And the deep mystery.
So again, this whole presentation, no conversation about any possibility that surfaces have something to do with the phenomenon. And that as you bring surfaces together, you obviously have a higher likelihood of passing close to the surface. Not a single sentence.
Is what I described. And no one can go any deeper today, but only wider. Now, I mentioned probabilities in this calculation. What we're calculating here, this curve, is the probability of arrival of an electron. The question is there any way to determine where it really arrives? We are not averse.
We know where it really arrives, so that's not I don't even know why he said that. Obviously we know where it arrives.
Using the theory of probability, that is calculating odds, when a situation is very complicated, you throw up a die and it spins so many times. And the air with the various resistance and atoms and all this complicated business that...
Right, and nobody fell for the idea that this is an incalculable thing that we couldn't possibly know, that we can't possibly film it in slow motion and account for most of the effects and blah, blah. Of course we can. It's just very difficult. But we can do it. We didn't presume there was a law that says we're not allowed to, a universal law that says we're not allowed to watch what the dice does. The only place where it's not allowed is where the thing is the smallest thing in the universe and we can't see it. I'm just saying, it just seems kind of obvious. Isn't that very convenient? That the place you say this law exists is in a place we clearly can't see. But the places we can see where there's complicated random events, randomized events, nothing's truly random, we know that there's a real cause and effect chain. We know that there's no law of the universe that says the die is going to be randomized. We know the environment randomizes it.
We're perfectly willing to allow that we don't know enough details, and so we calculate the odds that the thing will come this way or that way. But here, what we're proposing, is it not, is that there be probability all the way back at the fundamental laws. That in the fundamental laws of physics, there are odds. For example,
right, and they only apply to photons and electrons, and they don't apply to dice, and they don't apply to planets, and they don't apply to all the other stuff that goes through a bunch of circumstantial interactions over time that makes its outcome complicated. The human being, for example, we're very complicated, lots of nuances, but we know the cause and effect is there. We know we have to practice the piano to play the piano well. We know we have to do homework to be able to learn how to do our equations. We know it's just a fact. The cause and effect is there. We know it's there. There's no law of you're born to be a piano player. We know that ain't real.
Example, suppose that I have an experiment so set up that with the light out, I get this interference situation and know that. Then I say that with the light on, I can't predict through which hole it will go. I only know that each time I look, it'll be one hole or the other. But there is no way to predict ahead of time through which hole it goes.
Unless, of course, you aim the photons. Again, there's no law that says you can't aim them, except the fact that it's hard to shoot photons straight. We don't have a laser precise enough to even shoot photons that precisely that distance.
The future, in other words, is unpredictable. It is impossible to predict in any way from any information ahead of time.
Yeah, predicting where the smallest thing in the universe is going to go is going to be something that's not accessible. That shouldn't be a huge surprise to us that we're not going to be able to know. That's like knowing how tall the shortest blade of grass is in the lawn or something. I'm not going to know that. It's going to take an awful lot of research to figure that out. What's the shortest piece of hay in a haystack? Can't just know that stuff easy, but it's knowable.
Through which the thing will go, or which hole it will be seen behind. That means that physics is kind of given up.
Yes, that's exactly the point. You gave up on being scientists and decided to be theologians. Sorry, I mean, I know it's derogatory, but that's all it looks like. They gave up on the scientific method. They gave up on waiting for evidence before they draw conclusions. They gave up on doing experiments to gain insight. They gave up on all of it and just said, let's make it up. And they just started making it all up. It's all a big fantasy story. Gluon, puon, muon, nuon, blah, blah. It's all blah, 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 blah. Scant little nothing pieces of evidence. No reason to believe it's really something.
The purpose was, and everybody thought it was, to know enough that in given the situation, you can predict what's going to happen next. Given the circumstances, you can predict what happened.
It's pretty easy to predict once you've seen it a few times. So again, it's like saying I predicted that the roulette wheel is the simplest one. I predicted it'll fall one in one of the slots. Wow, I'm a genius. No, I see it do that over and over again. I see it fall in one. Yeah.
There's a source, so a light source, tell me which hole, behind which hole will I see the electron? You say, well, the reason you can't tell through which hole you're going to see the electron is it's determined by some very complicated things back here. If I knew enough...
It's determined by where you shot it. And the fact is you started this off by saying you're not shooting straight. And that's the whole point. So if you shot it straight, then you have a much better chance of predicting where it's going to go. But the fact is you're not shooting straight. So you don't know. You're blindfolded and somebody's spinning you and you're just saying shoot this way, whatever this way is. You don't know which way it is.
About that electron, it has internal wheels, internal gears, and so forth. That's a fact, and that this is what determines through which hole it goes. So it's 50-50 probability because, like a die, it's set sort of at random. And that if I were to have studied it carefully enough, your physics is incomplete. If you get a complete...
Yes, exactly, and that's exactly the truth. Your physics is grotesquely incomplete and silly and superficial, and you're pretending that this is a good enough answer when it's religion. It's a simple... Religion is just a simplification. Let's just make a creator that's responsible for everything, then we don't have to think about it. I mean, it's just, 10 Commandment. There, I've solved everything. No, it's just mush.
Then you'll be able to predict through which hole it goes. That's the hidden variable theory, so-called. Well, that's not possible.
So he says it's not possible, and again, he has no reason to say that. They haven't done the evidence to prove it, the experiments to prove it's not possible. They haven't tried, and just the assumption that I have thought of all the possible scenarios. So now I will declare it impossible. It's like saying the pyramids had to be done by UFOs because one man thinking about it for one day didn't figure it out. And it takes a lot of people thinking about it a lot to figure out maybe, there's all kinds of tricks that'll work. You seriously, is that a doubtable circumstance that this guy is basically just saying that me and my friends thought about it, we didn't come up with an answer, therefore we have to blame aliens? Isn't that all he's doing?
It is not due to a lack of detailed knowledge that we cannot make a prediction, because I said that if I didn't turn on the light, I should get this interference pattern.
Again, so he's talking about an experiment he never did. So he keeps talking about it like it's a real experiment. No, it's just a thought experiment. They thought about doing it, and they thought about what the outcomes would be, and that's all that happened here. There's no real experiment from which they have gleaned any information. Never tried, never performed, never written in a paper, nothing. Doesn't exist.
If I have a circumstance in which I get that interference pattern, then it is impossible to analyze it in terms of saying it goes through here or here. Because that current is so simple, mathematically a different thing than the contribution of this and this as probability. So if it were possible for you...
So again, I just argue it once again. All I have to do is aim the initial piece of energy. If I'm able to aim it precisely, then I can know what slit it went through without having to detect it, without having to disturb it in any way, and I'll resolve the effect, having a physical effect on it, and you'll get your pattern. I'll guarantee you that'll be the result. I'll guarantee it in the sense of, if I'm wrong, you might as well smash me to death with a sledgehammer because the universe is insane. I'm saying, yes, no, the universe is quite sensible, and the fact is if I aim photons or electrons at those slits and I just put them into the slits in a random pattern, I'll get exactly the same pattern out.
To have determined through which hole it was going to go if I had the light on. The fact that I have the light on has got anything to do with it. Whatever gears there are back here that you observed, which permitted you to tell me whether it was going to go through one or two, you could have observed if I had the light off.
Really seems to me that they probably do have a laser that's actually a small enough point that they could shoot the laser through one slit or the other slit. Seems to me. And they could prove this case one way or the other. I'm quite sure if they shoot the beam through one slit for 1 second and then they shoot the beam through the other slit for 1 second, they'll get exactly the same pattern. It's single photons that are doing it, so...
And therefore you could have told me with the light off what hole, each time an electron goes, which hole it's going to go through. But if you can do this, then that curve would have to be represented as a sum of those that go through there and those that go through there, and it ain't. And therefore...
So again, he says it ain't, there ain't no experiment. So it ain't, but there ain't no experiment. There ain't no evidence, there ain't no proof, there ain't no nothing except I say so. And that's all he has. I say so. I've told you reality. I got it from God and I gave it to you. But that's all this is. There's no evidence. There's no logic. There's no reasoning. You can't show me the evidence that leads him to the conclusion. He accepted the conclusion without any evidence.
It's impossible to have any information ahead of time as to which hole it's going to go through when the light is out or when the light is on or out in a circumstance.
So again, you don't need the light if you just aim the photons or you just aim the electrons. So again, it's a moot point. There are ways to do the experiment where you can isolate which slit it went through. You can guarantee which slit it went through. You'll know what slit it went through, and you'll still have your pattern.
What the experiment is set up there can produce this interference. So it is not a lack of unknown gears.
So again, he keeps saying it. It's not when he has no right to say it. He has no right to say it's like some artist saying, "I've painted everything. Everything is paintable. I painted. I imagined everything, all the possibilities. I made every movie that ever is going to be ever made." I mean, it's an insanely egocentric, insane thing to say. I have eliminated all the possibilities because I thought about it for 10 minutes. I mean, it's an outrageous jumping of having anything like evidence to defend your statement.
The lack of internal computations that makes nature have probability in it, it seems to be in some sense intrinsic.
It seems to be. Yeah, to you it seems to be. To you. You've drawn the conclusion. I don't see any reason to draw that conclusion. I don't see any evidence supporting that conclusion. It doesn't seem to me at all. It only seems to you.
Someone has said it this way: nature herself doesn't know which way the electron is going to go.
Which is just silly. So again, it's just silly baby talk. Let's just turn the universe into something silly, blah, 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 blah. It's just silly. No reason to believe the universe doesn't know. No reason to believe the cause and effect isn't real. No reason to believe that people have to be born before they can die. Blah, 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 blah. No reason to believe any of this preposterous crap.
A philosopher once said,
yeah, it's no point in talking to people. They're too fucking stupid. That's what a philosopher once said.
it is necessary for the very existence of science that the same conditions always produce the same result.
Yeah, a perfectly rational statement defended by volumes and volumes and volumes of evidence, and real experiments. That's what the real experiments indicate. That's what the real evidence indicates. And they have no evidence of anything other except them saying, well, those things we can't see, they don't obey those rules. I can't believe I'm having to have this conversation with people who are supposed to have some sort of thing called intelligence. That's how bad this is. Again, there's absolutely no evidence anywhere else in the universe of any of this magic, and yet they dump it all. All the magic is in the thing we can't see. The one thing, the small thing, we can't see them. Yes, it's a limitation. We can't see them for a very good reason, because they're very small, very fast, and that's where they put all the magic. How convenient.
Well, they don't.
Says you. With no evidence to show me. You don't have any evidence to show me. You have a fake experiment you didn't do. But you don't have any evidence.
Electrons, in any way, I mean, you set up the circumstance here in the same conditions every time, and you cannot predict behind which hole you'll see the...
Yeah, the fact that you can't predict doesn't mean that you had the same conditions. You don't know if you had the same conditions. Well, I put the electron in the same place. There must be the same conditions. We can't see them. He can't detect them. He says, well, I can't even shoot photons at them without screwing everything up. How do you know you created the same circumstances? Oh, that's right, you don't know. Holy crapoli. And then we're talking about surfaces that are undulating, constantly vibrating. This is a guy who talks about that all the time, about how everything is jiggling. The whole universe is full of jiggling crap. How the hell could you ever create the same circumstances in a world full of jiggling crap? Amazing.
Electrons. They don't, and yet the science goes on in spite of it. Although the same conditions don't produce the same results. That makes us unhappy that we think...
Okay, and it's just a lie, all right? I mean, it's just a silly thing. Somehow they proved with this experiment that the same conditions don't create the same results. They have no evidence they started with the same conditions. They're talking about their gun being random and shooting in all kinds of directions. How is that the same conditions? It's always not the same condition when the gun is pointed in a different direction. I mean, shit! I mean, this is such bad logic.
Can't predict exactly what will happen. Incidentally, you can make a circumstance which is very dangerous and serious, and man must know and still can't predict it. For instance, we could cook up, I know we're not enough, but we could cook up a scheme by which we arrange photocells so that if it sees the electron, one electron is going to go through. If we see it behind hole number 1, we set off the atomic bomb and start World War III. If we go see it behind hole 2, we have just make peace feelers.
Well, obviously you don't want to do that experiment because you're going to lose pretty quick. I mean, 2 or 3 runs and you're already done, aren't you?
Delay the war a little longer. Then, the thing is that the future of man would then be dependent upon something which no amount of science can predict.
All right, so again, he just said no amount of science can predict. He's forcing it to be something magical. We can't understand it. We can't know what it is. There is no cause and effect. There's a magical property that says this photon is destined to be deflected 6 degrees, and that's what it is. The photon, when it left the gun, was already, somehow it was a 6-degree photon. I mean, it's just garbage. I mean, it's garbage because there's no reason to believe this UFO theory, this extraordinary explanation. They don't first have ordinary evidence. They have no evidence, let alone extraordinary evidence. I mean, extraordinary claims, extraordinary evidence. That's sort of the rule. But at a minimum, you should have ordinary evidence. He doesn't even have ordinary evidence. And he's jumping to the UFO conclusion.
The world is the future is unpredictable. What is necessary for the very existence of science and so forth, and what the characteristics of nature are not to be determined by compass preconditions.
Yeah, there are preconditions. Up is up, down is down, left is left, right is right. There's certain preconditions that are conditions. There's 3-dimensional space, blah, 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 blah. And yes, you want to just break every rule there is, fine. It's just, I have no reason to jump to your silly, well, let's all believe in the Holy Ghost, and let's believe in demons, and let's believe in gremlins, and let's believe in Sasquatch. No, I have no interest in doing any of that crap. All of this is crap. You have no evidence for any of these Sasquatchy rules or any of these UFO rules. This is all just a fable. It's a story they're telling. It has nothing to do with a scientific investigation. It has everything to do with taking a tiny bit of evidence and jumping way the hell off on it. Saying that, oh, it looks a little bit like, so I'm going to declare it is like. That is terrible science.
They are determined all.
I mean, it's like, they're ready to throw the platypus in the air because they think it's going to fly.
Always by the material with which we work, by nature herself. We look and we see what we're going to find, what we find, and we cannot say ahead of time successfully what it's going to look like.
Yeah, no, you've just done all that. You've just told us what the truth is, and you never did the experiment. I mean, you just did it right in front of us. You jumped way ahead of the evidence.
The most reasonable possibilities turn out often not to be the situation. What is necessary?
Again, that's just a cliche. I think it works exactly the other way around. All of the fake bullshit turns into being just stories. And, when we had cell phones and all this stuff, all of a sudden UFOs don't visit us nearly as much as they used to. Because what, they know we have cameras now? Is that why they don't visit as much? I mean, clearly all the bullshit gets wiped out. It's not the other way around. We don't discover that the world's more complicated. We discover it's simpler. And that's just the truth. And you people are just so far behind.
The very existence of science is just the ability to experiment, the honesty.
Okay, the ability to experiment and not do the experiments, right? So the ability to think about experiments, don't bother doing them, and the ability to jump ahead of them. And then he's using the word honesty. Where's the honesty in pretending you did an experiment you didn't do? You're pretending you have conclusive evidence or reason to believe. Pretending you have reason to believe when you don't have any reasons to believe. The reasons to believe are the evidence. If you don't have evidence, you don't have reasons to believe.
In reporting results, the results must be reported without somebody saying what they think.
Yeah, so, I mean, you can't get any worse than this, right? There's no experiment and no results, and he's reporting a conclusion based on the no results in the non-existent experiment. You can't get more hypocritical in here, can you? This is just overt duplicity. Do as I say, not as I do.
Like the results to have had been rather than. And finally, Clearly, an important thing is the intelligence to interpret the results, but important point about this intelligence is that it should not be sure ahead of time about what must be.
So amazing. He just gave us a declarative statement about a bunch of must-be's. It must be that Heisenberg is right. It must be that randomness is in the core of the universe. He gave us a whole pile of what must-be's based on no reasoning that he can share with me, no logic that I can follow along with his logical train. All he gave me was a fake thought experiment that he just made up the results for. And he tells me, aren't you convinced by my fake evidence? No, I'm not. I mean, it's like taking somebody's head, right? You know, your trial, and all you have is a dark figure who breaks into a car and murders the woman and then runs away. And you take the head of the defendant and you glue it on the video to make it look like the defendant did it. You say, isn't that great evidence? No, it's stupid.
Now, it can be prejudiced and say that's very unlikely. I don't like that. Prejudice is different than absolute certainty. I don't mean absolute prejudice, just bias.
Again, this is just such a joke when he just finished giving us a whole bunch of admonishments for thinking that we could figure something out or there's any possibility some other solution could be the correct answer. He just told us this is the truth, believe it or not. And now he's talking about, you should be cautious and, keep your mind, be nimble and, be free from projecting. And he's projecting all over the place.
But not strict bias, not complete prejudice. As long as you're biased, it doesn't make any difference because if the fact is true, there will be a perpetual accumulation of experiments.
Right, but eventually they're going to have to undo all this stuff, and we know how resistant the world is to undoing anything. We still got a frickin' Pope sitting in his little palace doing silly Pope crap. It's so hard to break these stupid traditions. So once this gets established that, Einstein and Feynman and these people know what they're talking about, it just takes forever to demonstrate how, no, it was a mistrial. You need to do the trial over because that was a garbage trial.
Only annoy you until they cannot be disregarded any longer. Only can be disregarded if you're absolutely sure ahead of time of some precondition that science has to have.
Right, and he mocked the precondition that if you do the same experiment under the same circumstances, you get the same result. He mocked that. What the hell? I mean, there's just nothing. So yes, we don't have a common ground to start with. I think yes, extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. They need at least ordinary evidence. And almost any claim needs some evidence. Some evidence.
In fact, it is necessary for the very existence of science that minds exist which do not allow that nature must satisfy some preconceived conditions.
Right, that there are basic rules. So again, this preconceived, it's not preconceived, it's learned over experience living on planet Earth, thousands of years of human beings interacting with the Earth, and we find out that, we thought demons lived in people, and it wasn't demons, they just had a headache. We find out that there's certain facts, okay, that, God didn't make women have periods because of Eve's sins. And we figure, this is nonsense. That there's reasons for these things to take place, and we find out the answers, the right answers. And we don't live in stupid, ignorant notions. And all this quantum mechanics is a made-up pile of crap, a bunch of conventions that have nothing to do with anything called evidence. Real evidence.
Like those of our philosophy.
Just a horrible pile of horseshit, really. And like I said, I find Feynman a likable personality, but the truth is the truth. He was an insanely arrogant, egotistical, pontificating douchebag, and it's just a fact. Way too full of himself, and way too. His physics sucks. As demonstrated by his inability to get either the history right or the facts regarding what experiments have been done right. Okay, so that's enough. Sorry, it's like a 2-hour video at least, but you didn't have to watch it. I think it has, like I said, I think this is where the ship starts heading for the iceberg. This is where you got to talk first and explain how you don't have to hit icebergs. You don't have to take this wacky course. There are rational alternatives. And you have to start there. You have to start with the ability to recognize, oh yeah, maybe I should listen to other possible choices because this does sound like horseshit. And it's clearly not based on evidence. He would have shown me the evidence if it had evidence. Okay. So that'll do, pig, as they say. Some people say. Till next time and such.